Hello again, and welcome to the daily book reading of the festive blog hop. I will be reading chapter 3 of Dolor and Shadow. Yes, and then I will be having another video posting where I talk about Francis H. Powell and do a reading from his website. So I am supporting my favorite anime today. This is One Piece. Okay. And now Dolor and Shadow. And this is chapter 3 that I will be writing. Reading. I've already done the writing. So, one moment. I love this chapter! Okay, alright. I have many people who are waiting on this, and this is Berrigan's entrance. So, I love Berrigan. Okay. Love Berrigan almost as much as I love anime. Okay, chapter 3. At the end of a barren road, a dilapidated stable stood as private as one could hope. Moss and turf, more than an arm's length in height, buried the sagging roof. The sound of the city had long since vanished. Here, beside a fisher's daughter, Berrigan lay, his broad shoulders made wide from hours spent wielding a sword. Thoughts of a pair of deep black eyes, an intoxicating laugh, and the glow of copper skin had followed him all the way back to Gunir from Rakadet. A pang pulled at his chest, and he shifted his head to the maid asleep beside him. Her back glistened white beneath a ray of sunlight. Strands of yellow hair flowed down her bare back, to spill over onto the furs. For a moment he imagined her hair black, and he shook his head to forget. Her Nordic skin had never seen the unforgiving sun of Rakadet. Had she lived in the desert lands, she would almost have the same glow as Berrigan pinched the bridge of his nose. He couldn't lay there much longer. Another time, and he would have thought of little else. Another time, and he wouldn't have permitted the maid to rest. Today he was a fool for trying. Taking great care to not disturb Hilda, Berrigan shifted himself from beneath the blankets and pulled on his trousers. His black shoulder-length hair fell forward, blocking the girl from view. For that he was grateful. Coming here, trying to forget. For 2 years he had done little else. Berrigan took up his tunic and pulled it over his head. "Hey, Berrigan!" the girl groaned. Taking up his bag, Berrigan turned for the door before his brother could— "Berrigan!" Berrigan stumbled out of the stables, dropped his bag at his feet, and gazed at Rune, who stood as tall as he. "Shh!" Berrigan hissed, buckling his belt. His menacing silver-blue eyes, so like his brother's, caught the sun's light, making him appear more threatening than usual. Rune grinned. "Not back half a day, and already you lure one of your mistresses in waiting to your shack." Rune slapped his hand down on his brother's back, hugged him briefly, and released him. Berrigan abandoned his feigned irritation for a wide grin, and returned a slap to Rune's shoulder. "She was there on the docks when my ship came in," Berrigan said. "Now, dear brother, what would you move to disturb my love-making?" Rune rested his backside against the little that remained of a weathered fence. "Another maiden has beckoned us to call," Rune said. A twinge of relief pricked Berrigan's chest, welcoming any delay from returning home, where solitude waited to torment him. "Swan," Berrigan said, doing his best to appear annoyed. He looked back at the stables. Without word or protest, he took up his bag and slung it over his shoulder. "What about—" Rune nodded at the stables as he pushed himself up from the fence. Berrigan glanced back at the doorway, then shrugged. She'll forgive me," he said, and joined Rune down the dirt path toward the stone bridge that would carry them from Gunir into the forest to the valley. "What news?" Rune asked once the stables were well out of sight. Berrigan stared off to the end of the road that twisted behind a grove of birch trees as he sank back into memories of the last 5 years. How to begin, he mused. Words would barely begin to describe the beauty of Rakadet, with her white sands turned gold in the sun. The alabaster palaces surrounded by the sea of sand brick buildings, bristling with bustling markets that thrived on the trade ships coming into port on the White Sea. Statues carved from limestone and ebony alabaster, and great white pillars adorned every hall. Papyrus and palm gardens burst with life along the shores of the city and within the gardens of the Serapeum. Everything was there. Anything could be found in those markets, from sliders and pet desert spiders to eastern silks and fine curved blades from the mountains of Quilpring. The ports overflowed with the latest innovations and astounding theories from the deserts. The City of Gold, Berrigan had often called it. He grunted. Rune creased his brow and shifted a suspicious eye to Berrigan. "Gone 5 winters, and all you have to show for it is a grunt?" "Not much to say," Berrigan said, batting at a low-hanging branch still dripping wet with cool morning dew. "Glad to be out of the desert heat." Berrigan felt Rune scrutinize his cold demeanor before changing the subject as if deciding on a different approach. "How was the academia?" Rune asked, stepping over a root in his path. "Burned," Berrigan said. 3 years ago. Rune tripped over his own feet. Burned 3 years ago, and you're only getting home now? Rune asked. What kept you? Bergen thought for a while before answering. Obligations. Bergen felt the hesitation as a knot formed in his throat. So much for keeping his secret. Obligation, Rune said. His tone confirmed he doubted Bergen's half-truth. It wouldn't have anything to do with a queen from the lands below the White Sea, now would it? Bergen stopped dead on the trail. His lips tightened from the snarl he suppressed. At once his thoughts drifted to a pair of black eyes and skin as gold as the sun. He was unaware that he had clenched his fists. Zabai. A bird chirped, breaking the silence. Where did you get the egg, Bergen? Rune asked. The corner of Bergen's mouth curled, and he resumed walking. Didn't Swan tell you? He asked with a hint of humor that told Rune he was in for a runaround that would delay the topic as long as a fortnight if he let it. Rune shrugged. No matter. I'm sure Mother would love to hear that you could have been back nearly 3 winters ago if a certain lady hadn't detained you. You're a whelp. Rune grinned. I am. Bergen inhaled the cold, sharp air of the Nordic winds that blew in off the Lake Von Ern. He released a long, quiet breath. The academia wasn't just an academia. It was a shrine. There were days it felt like it damn near made up the entire city of Rakadet. It had its own community that answered to its own laws. There were streets filled with dorms, gardens, markets, lecture halls, theaters, museum. Rune arched his brow. Museum? The Muses' Hall. It was the wing dedicated to the study of metric speech. Music, Rune said. Bergen nodded. Among other areas of interest. And a library, the largest this side of the Silk Roads. They followed their path toward the stone bridge that carried them over the river Klalo. The library is what kept me, Bergen said. Rune didn't answer. Since its construction, the academia has grown at the center of education in Rakadet, Bergen continued. With the muses and the extended teachings of... You're losing your audience, dear brother, Rune interjected. I already skipped my lessons for the day. The scholars collected everything that came into port, Bergen said, and everything that came into port was taken and added to the growing Serapeum. Anything that could be used for study was taken. Every artifact was confiscated and housed in the museum. Every written word was taken and copied in the library. When my ship pulled into port 5 years ago, so were my manuscripts. Rune gave Bergen a solemn look. They took everything, Bergen said, even letters. They gave us coin for our troubles, and the writings were eventually returned to us, but... He shook his head. They would only return the copies the scriveners made. They kept the originals to be added to their library. Your notes, even? Rune asked. Gone, Bergen said, unable to meet Rune's eyes. All of them. Naturally, you wanted them back. Well, yeah, Bergen scoffed. So I did what I do. You caused a commotion, Rune said, which drew the attention of the woman who ran the place, Bergen beamed. You didn't, Rune said with a faint look of surprise. You're mocking me. I'm sorry, Rune said, as Bergen watched a pair of male sparrows land in the road, locked at the beaks. Wings flailed, throwing up a small puff of dirt, and by the time they were airborne again, their mood had subsided. So what happened, Rune asked. Bergen shrugged. I found the school and rode and traced my manuscripts back to the library where I got a job as a scrivener. And the woman who ran the place? Bergen pretended to be interested in the trees ahead while he collected the courage to speak. Turned out to be the Queen of Rakadet. The knot in his throat returned. And the egg. Bergen shrugged. I didn't get to layer. His jaw tightened. The egg, Bergen, Rune said. It's common in Rakadet as the sliders for sale at market. Bergen sighed. The woman who took my manuscripts, the Queen, had found the egg on a Sclavinian ship. Bergen shoved a branch out of his way. How did you get the egg? Bergen knew that flux in Rune's tone, and was suddenly aware of how much he had missed it. Rune wasn't going to buy any story he manufactured. Oh, but he was going to try. She gave it to me. Just like that. Implausibility dripped from Rune's tone. Right after the hunting and the drinking, Bergen said, smiling through his lie. Rune raised a doubtful brow at Bergen. The Queen of Rakadet was hunting and drinking with you, Rune said. Bergen nodded. At least that part of it was true. She did, he said, still grinning. Rune threw Bergen a look that told him he knew better, but Bergen held his gaze on the path ahead. Sclavinian artifacts are notorious for their curses, Rune said. An old memory surfaced, and Bergen failed to suppress a grin. I've had my share of experiences with Sclavinian, Bergen said. And the artifacts release the curse only on those who steal from you. Besides, Bergen waved his hands, I've carried that thing now for 3 years and nothing's happened to me. How did you get the egg, Bergen? Bergen took a long moment, recalling the breeze that blew in from the sea that night. The desert moonlight had filled Zabai's chambers. Her cheeks glowed with a red that poured down her bronze neck, flushed from too much wine. Her eyes, like black pools, pulled him in too easily, even for him. Her lips? There wasn't a day he didn't regret not kissing those lips. Berrigan fisted his hand and did his best to ignore the tightness in his chest. If he had known that his last 2 years with Zabai were at an end, she gave it to me in exchange for a promise. Before or after you bedded her, Rune asked. Berrigan flashed Rune a somber look, withdrawing Rune's eye. I did not bed her. Not this one. Berrigan returned his attention to the road. No one did. Rune took an extra long step over a bare root. Rakadet has always attracted a lot of attention ever since trade was established centuries ago, Berrigan continued. War is always on the horizon there, with the rising western threat that the Gutar brought with them across Danu's river. The Gutar? Rune asked. They were there? Berrigan nodded. A shadow had fallen over his face. They destroyed the great temple not 3 winters before my arrival. Rune stopped and grabbed Berrigan's arm, nearly pulling him to the ground. His face had fallen white. The great temple. Berrigan nodded. Destroyed. There was a pause while Berrigan waited for Rune to find his feet again. Tension on the trade routes was high, Berrigan said once they started again down the road. Still is. 2 years after my arrival, the Empire in the south invaded Rakadet. It ransacked the city and set the Academy on fire. We managed to put out the flames, but the library was beyond repair. The sudden stench of camel flooded back to Berrigan, bringing back every detail of that night. His stomach felt like it would fall out of him as he recalled the brush of Zabai's breast on his arm when he hoisted his lady, not my lady, never my lady, onto her camel. The high moon seemed to have filled her black eyes. She was still flushed red from the wine and tipsy when they started out across the endless dunes to the Euphratu River. It was there on the banks of the Euphratu that they departed. There that she gave him the egg, and there he gave his promise. It was there he left her to die. Fire nipped the tip of Berrigan's nose as he tightened his jaw and swallowed the bitter bite in the back of his throat. There was too much he wasn't saying, too much he couldn't say. When it was over, I gathered up the last of the surviving scriveners, and we moved what was left to the new library. Berrigan forced out the end of his story. And your manuscripts? Rune asked. Lost in the fire, Berrigan said. There was a moment of silence, as if grieving the loss of his works. What happened to your queen? Rune asked. A disquieted look blanketed Berrigan's face. The last time I saw her, the Emperor had her walk the streets of the imperial city, wearing nothing but chains of gold, Berrigan couldn't bring himself to say, and instead fell silent as he recalled the shimmering gold in the desert sun and her dark bronze skin. Her hair had fallen down her back like black rain that barely covered her rounded backside. She held her high even then, he recalled. And so you stayed, Rune finished for Berrigan, pulling him out of the withdrawn daze he had drifted into. Berrigan nodded, to care for what little was left. There was another prolonged silence as they made their way deeper into the wood. What aren't you telling me, brother? Rune asked. Indifference blanketed Berrigan's eyes, but Rune didn't seem to notice. There was another fire. Rune kicked his own foot and stumbled, then regained his balance. It's why I came home, Berrigan said coldly. The Emperor got to it. There's nothing left. A breeze swept their path, giving Berrigan a chance to breathe in the fresh Nordic winds he had spent 5 years missing. I got to see the lighthouse of Rakadet, Berrigan said. How was it? Berrigan shrugged. Big. Rune dropped his shoulders. Oh, is that all? Almost as big as the pyramid I saw in the Black Land across the river. Rune made a sound that combined a loathsome grunt and an impressed scoff. Berrigan fell silent again. What does it look like? Rune asked. Berrigan scratched the unshaven black bristles on his face. Wet. Not the river, Rune said. The lighthouse. Berrigan shrugged as if it was every day he saw a behemoth rise from the sea. A tower extends from a white octagon that stands on a square base. There's a room atop the tower where they use a kind of metal plate to catch the sun. At night they light a fire. Your description exceeds your skills, Rune drummed sarcastically. 4 statues adorn the octagon, Berrigan said, and Odin stands at the top welcoming the ships to port. Your words move me, Rune said as they entered the edge of the valley. A cold, empty smirk pulled at Berrigan's mouth. Also saw the statue of the High Mountain and the mausoleum at Helicanars. I hate you. You missed me. In the valley, Swan made her way up a lively little brook, stepping lightly upon the stones poking out from beneath the water. With her precious egg clutched in one hand and a bundle of pussy willows bunched in the other, Swan swayed as she balanced barefoot on each moss-covered stone. As she hopped from stone to stone, she sang her sweet song, skipping to the next stone on the downbeat of each new phrase. Sing and skip a fairy mound, o'er the hill and through the town, where the fey king's halls are gold, where they sing their songs of old. On the final downbeat, Swan slipped and fell ankle-deep into the water. Hopping back to the stones, she continued with the chorus, undeterred by her wet feet. Through Through the wind the spriggans play, o'er the sea where they stay. The Queen of Fae, she sits there still, tending the earth beneath her hill. On the last 3 words of the verse, Swan leapt from the stone into the cold water and giggled, delighted at her own game. With branches fisted in hand, Swan hiked her skirts to her knees and sloshed her way back to the bank of the brook, then stepped onto dry land. Skipping ahead through the birch trees, with her golden hair streaking the forest, she sang, "Sing and skip, O fairy mounds, o'er the hill and through the dell, where the mystical Fae King's throne fills the earth with ancient song." Swan timed her song so that at its end she fell to her knees on the ground before a mound of dried leaves and dead branches. Setting aside the willows and gently placing the egg's chest into the grass beside her, Swan hummed as she cleared the leaves away until bit by bit a golden light seeped, then threaded itself up and out of the earth like a spring of golden water. Through the wind the spriggans play, o'er the sea where they stay. With a wide grin, Swan fixed her silver eyes upon the golden light and sang, quiet and low beneath the wind, "Through the wind the spriggans play, o'er the sea where they stay. The fairy queen, she sits there still, tending the earth beneath her hill, beneath her hill," Swan whispered, as she pulled away the last of the branches. Too entranced by the shimmering spray, too enthralled by the glittering gold, Swan failed to see the shadows lurking as darkness moved in. The clouds overhead had filled the sky, blocking the sun's warm light and casting a dismal gray over the earth. A cold, lifeless wind swept through the valley, and Swan shivered as she hummed her song. From the corner of her eye she saw too late the glimpse of a shadow. Startled, she turned, opened her mouth, and screamed as the darkness filled her lungs, plunging itself down into the throat of her belly, engulfing her. It left her screams to fill the valley. Thank you again if you enjoyed the reading, and if you want to follow up on the next ones or receive notices, by all means subscribe to the YouTube account. Also, you can subscribe to the I will get through this once without losing my train of thought. Subscribe to the website and also receive notifications of upcoming events and such. Thank you again very much.